beautiful day. Hi, and welcome back to Megan's science class. Today, we're going to be talking about communities. What would you say if I told you that I was standing in the middle of a beautiful community right now? You might think, yeah, you're standing in the forest out behind KSS. KSS is part of the community of Ganawage. Of course, Megan, of course you're in a community. But this forest itself is a community as well. You see, a community is when a bunch of different species of plants and animals live together in the same area. And this forest has many, many different species of plants and, the odd squirrel and chipmunk here and there, but it also has other animals like deer and coyotes, although they might not always live here. They might wander. So this is a community. Just like when you live in town, you live in a community with other people, with your pets, with the random cats and dogs that you find on the street, with the mosquitoes and the ladybugs and all the other pesky insects and all of the vegetables in your garden and everything that grows there. That is a community. Now, when we're talking about communities, we want to look at something that we call biodiversity. Biodiversity is the variety of species living in that community. And we can measure biodiversity in two ways. The first way, number one, is we count all the different species of plants and animals in that community. So if we wanted to count all the different kinds of trees, all the different kinds of mosses and lichens and mushrooms and animals that are in this forest, we would find that this forest has a lot of variety of different species. It has a lot of different populations. Whereas if we looked at the Arctic, where it's miles and miles of snow and ice in the wintertime, and in the summertime, a little bit less snow and ice, but there's really only like mosses, lichens, a few Arctic fox here and there, a few seal here and there. It's pretty sparse. So there aren't a lot of different species that live in the Arctic compared to this forest here. The second way we measure biodiversity is we look at what's called the relative abundance. And that is basically comparing populations of different species. So we would take a look to see if all the species are doing relatively well. There's a certain standard that they have to meet. And if they don't meet that standard, that means that that population is declining. If they're way above that standard, that means that that population is thriving and possibly taking over the territory of other plants or animals. So when we look at a community that is biodiverse, we want to have a large variety of species, and we want to make sure that the relative abundance of each species is at about the same level. Now, since a community is made of many different species living in the same area, there are bound to be interactions between those species. There are actually 4 main interactions that we're going to be looking at today. Those 4 interactions are called predation, competition, mutualism, and commensalism. Let's talk about the first one, predation. Predation involves the interaction between 2 species, the prey and the predator. So, as we all know, everything needs to eat in order to live. Unless you make your own food. Right, plants? Plants make their own food. So, everything else needs to eat in order to get their energy. So, the predator is the one who does the eating. The prey is the one who gets eaten. Let's take a look at an example.
Take a look at that vicious predator eating that crunchy green grass. Yeah, deer are predators. They eat grass and other living things that are plant-like, and that's predation, eating.
The next one I want to talk about is competition. As you have probably experienced, competition is when there's an interaction between two individuals. It could be from the same species or it could be from different species, where they are basically fighting over a certain resource. It could be food, it could be water, it could be shelter, it could be mates, it could be territory. We've all participated in group sports, whether we've wanted to or not, right? And some of those group sports like soccer or hockey or football or rugby are very competitive. You're competing to try and win, essentially. And in nature, it's the same thing. But in nature, you want to win something that will help you survive. So you might want to win the favor of a mate, or you might want to win a bunch of food that you can feed to your family, or you might want to win territory so that you have a bigger area to go hunting. Let's take a look at an example of competition.
Take a look at these squirrels. Look at that. They're kind of vicious, kind of, but seem to be fighting over something. I wonder what. Could it be territory or a mate?
The next one is mutualism. This one, a lot of people have a hard time with, and I think that's because people don't know what the word mutual means. So the word mutual basically means both. So in mutualism, you have two individuals, could be from the same species, could be from different species, but you have two individuals that benefit from the interaction that they have. Let's take a look at an example.
The interaction between the honeybee and a flower mutually benefits both. You see, the bee will take nectar from the flower, and in the meantime, the bee will get all meshed up in the pollen of the flower. The nectar is food for the bee and food for his hive. And once he has collected enough nectar from that flower, he's going to fly off onto the next one. When he flies off onto the next one, he takes the pollen with him. And that pollen will help fertilize the next flower, which then is able to let that flower make seeds so that it can regrow again in the springtime.
The last one on our list is commensalism. So commensalism is, again, we have two individuals and they interact in some way or form. Now with commensalism, only one of them benefits, but the other one doesn't get negatively affected by it, like in predation. It just doesn't care. This thing could exist or it could not exist, and then this individual would still be okay. So with commensalism, there's an interaction and only one of them benefits, but the other one remains unaffected. Let's take a look at our final example. Here is an example of commensalism. So, you see right up here, there is a nest in this tree. Let's take a look at it. Let's zoom into it. That's probably a squirrel's nest. It's pretty big. I mean, it could belong to a bigger hawk or a bigger bird, but chances are it's a squirrel. There's lots of squirrels in this forest. So the tree doesn't care that there's a nest living in it. The tree still grows and it still makes its own food when it has its leaves. Right now, the leaves have fallen because it is fall, but it doesn't care. The squirrel, on the other hand, benefits greatly because it can raise its young in a safe place, it can sleep in a safe place, and it doesn't have to worry about having to find shelter all the time because it has a safe place to stay. So the squirrel benefits from having its nest in the tree while the tree doesn't care. And that is commensalism. So let's summarize. A community is when a bunch of different species of plants and animals live together in the same area. A community is considered to be biodiverse when you have lots of different species living in that area and they're relatively the same abundance compared to each other. Now, there are interactions that happen in a community. You have predation, where one thing will eat another thing. You have competition, where two things compete for the same resource. You have mutualism, where the interaction benefits both things. And then you have commensalism, where the interaction benefits one creature or one plant, while the other one remains unaffected. That's all for today. I'll see you guys next time when we start talking about ecosystems.